Good evening, folks. Welcome to our program. We have an excellent speaker tonight, and we officers won't hold you up very long in a meeting. I want to mention we have 4 officers here. Jeannie Peterson is the secretary, and Carol Russell is our corresponding secretary. Mike Pano is our treasurer, and I'm the president of the Oxford Historical Society. And we'll have very brief reports. Mike has a report on our treasury, and Mike Pano, if you would.
For those of you who haven't heard, we had to replace the roof at the depot. It's okay to mention that.
Sure, I would. If you didn't, I would.
Local contractor Bill Kelsey did the work. He was the low bidder. The cost of that was just under $14,000. A while back, we were given $20,000 by Bob Ingersoll, and we used that money to pay for the roof. And the balance of the $20,000 after we paid for the roof has been invested in a 1-year CD at the bank. Other than the roof project, we have not really had any out of the ordinary expenses. The primary expenses have been utilities and insurance at the depot. Since the first of the year, we've received tax support payments from both the town and the village. We've also received about $900 in other gifts and donations, and we've taken in roughly $600 from museum sales and from the band concert. Overall, we're in good shape financially. We're taking in more than we're paying out. We're on budget, and we have about $4,000 in the checking account, and other than that, we have a little less than $30,000 in different savings accounts and CDs at the bank. Any questions?
Sure, what's the depot?
Oh, I'm sorry. That is,
The depot is the old DL&W railroad station or depot over here, and it's now, we have a 99-year lease on that, and that's our little museum. And until just a few years ago, we used to hold our programs in there, but it's very crowded in there. So we now have our programs over here, and we just agreed at our last meeting that we're going to continue here all the time on our programs and use the museum space as better display area than we've been doing. Use the whole floor there for displays. So that's the depot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Who do you lease it from, Fred?
I beg your pardon?
Who do you lease it from?
The village. What happened was the village was basically given it for $1, I think, by the railroad, DL&W, when it went under. And so they used it for years as a storage space for their village equipment. And it was quite a mess when we took it over in '92. I wouldn't say a wreck, but it was quite a mess. And, but we have that 99-year lease, which will probably outlast us.
when did it start? When did it start?
92. Well, Jeannie Peterson, we talked over the report on the band concert, and Mike mentioned it. We made about $180 that night. We took in with gifts and so on, and so that's always a good time. It's like an ice cream social we have there. That's her report. And I was going to mention the roof, and Mike is painting such a rosy picture of our finances. That's kind of hard for me to make the appeal I was going to. And that is, we need more paid up members. So that's why we want all of you on our list signed in. And we won't appeal here tonight, but we'd like your email address or your mailing address, because in November, right around Thanksgiving, we're going to send out a letter that's going to, it might not sound as rosy as Mike's report, because we do need more members. You need more members for working and for participation and for the financial support that they lend, because it's, you know, we always want it to be, we always want to have a good cushion there, as we have now. So, that's it on the President's report. You'll be hearing an appeal. I'm going to introduce our distinguished speaker tonight. He's quite a guy. I've gotten to know him over the last few months. And he's the first person I personally ever met who was in this organization, the Hitler Youth or Hitler Jugend in the 1930s. And his life story, which he has told so well in this book, Growing Up Under Hitler, I Was There. And he will recount a good share of that for us this evening. And I'm absolutely positive you will be enthralled by his story. And you may be a bit surprised or educated by his story. It may be a bit different than you imagined, because we of us, and I see others in the room, who remember those days, had a distinct impression of the Hitler Youth. And it was not a positive impression over here in this country. And so you may get a different impression of the organization, and you certainly, I guarantee you, will have a good impression of this man, Ludwig Knapp, who's going to tell about his life story here. So, when he finishes, I'd like to say just one or two more things, okay? If you would. Thank you. Ludwig, would you speak to us? Thank you.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you for welcoming me to talk to you about something that I can never erase from my mind what the memories are. And I want to, if you want to use the word enlighten you, how it looked from somebody on the other side. My father was born 1905 on the 3rd of August, and I was born September 1, 1930, and by coincidence, both the days marked the outbreak of World War I. In my father's time, his birthday, August the 3rd, and my birthday, September 1, 9 years old in 1939. His was, of course, was 1914. It's an odd incident, but I think I'll tell you about it anyway. My father was very lucky. He grew up in a small town with a one-room schoolhouse. And usually you would think that they are not too well educated, you know. But we lived at a difficult time in Germany, and by God, he never made the wrong decision. And the fact was, his priority was to build a house before a war started. And he got it done in 1938. He did a lot of work himself, and the rest was contracted out. Took a 10-year mortgage, and guess what? After we started, finished the house and moved in, the value of the money went down. And he had a 10-year mortgage, and the year was 1948 when the money was paid off for the mortgage. And that's when the reform for the money took place in Germany. So he paid off that mortgage with rotten money, if you want, if you want to phrase it that way. He was a stonemason and had his own business, and it was pretty difficult for him. He had some close calls. There were political fights going on between, we had about 30 different parties in Germany that wanted to take the government. And the biggest fighters was the communists and the National Socialists under Hitler. And they didn't take any quarters, they killed each other, you know. So, and then they came looking, and one guy stuck a gun up my father's ribs and wanted information from him, and he wasn't aware of it to contribute anything. And he left, and he went to the police headquarters, and he wanted to put charges against him. And the policeman came out, and they knew my father, and he said, "Mr. Knapp, I heard your story. You can do it, push the charges, but the SS is occupying City Hall now. It's a different story altogether. I advise you not to. So what do you want to do?" He made a bad face and went home. He knew when to shut up. When Hitler finally took over, the reason was the conditions were pretty bad, and he made all kinds of promises, and of course he got Germany deep into it. What happened, you have to try to understand that his buddies, they were all former soldiers in World War I. They had trench warfare for 4 years, which is horrible, and they came out of it a little off. Let's face it. You think that's unusual? Look what happens with our people in the Middle East. You know, when they came back, how many commit suicide today? You know. So anyway, so he made the promises, and what happened, 1935, he was installed really. They had the most votes against the communists for the National Socialists. And Hindenburg, he was a hero in World War I, and he was the chancellor, and he wasn't so sharp anymore. He was in his 80s, 90s, and he gave the rudder to Adolf Hitler. He started to talk, and he picked scapegoats for Germany while they lost World War I. And the fact was, the US entered the war. They were in excellent shape. The troops were good, and they defeated the Germans. They turned things around, and they had the Germans on the run, and they would have probably invaded Germany and caused a lot of destruction, like the Germans did in Belgium and France. And some people in Germany, they had other ideas. Don't let it happen. So what happened, the facts were that the German Navy was unoccupied, you might say. And they had time to think. And what happened, they mutinied as a result of they had nothing to do. And the communists influenced them. That was one. The German General Staff, they voted to give up. And then there were people in the government, representatives, they also visualized the destruction that would occur if the war would continue. So they came and they said, we want peace. And they started to negotiate with the Germans, and President Wilson came over, and he was seriously sick. So when the English and the French saw that, they said, "Why don't you go home and get well again?" And he took them up on it, and then, of course, the peace conditions that possibly would have prevailed would have been something like, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I like to think so, between the southern states and the northern states after they ceased fire. But we had different conditions. The countries like Belgium and France, there was heavy damage inflicted by 4 years of warfare. And the conditions that they imposed on Germany were pretty tough. And it put the seed down for future trouble. Okay? Now, can anybody tell me why World War I started? What's your version of it?
I don't know.
They assassinated the Archduke.
But the
Ferdinand.
Archduke, right? Here's what happened. A teenager in Sarajevo, the Archduke with his wife, they came and visited that area. And they should have known better, because the Austrians, they were pretty harsh with the territory where they occupied. And so they decided they're gonna make trouble. They threw a bomb in the coach, but they missed. And what they do, in the afternoon, he goes with his wife again in the coach. He gives him another chance. And a teenager with a pistol killed the both of them. Okay? So then you had 3 countries involved: England, Russia, and Germany. And they had one thing in common. They all came from the same family stock, Queen Victoria. They had married into the Battenbergs, Mountbatten, in Germany. Regardless what came, they continued marrying into this. You saw recently some pictures, Queen, the British Queen, and that was in the 30s when she was, you know, Hitler salute. One of, or some of their family again had married into, that was under Hitler already, the Battenbergs or the Mountbattens, you know. So, needless to say, then you had inbreeding in the family, the Battenbergs and Queen Victoria. And instead of 3 cousins coming to an agreement for peace, they didn't like each other, and they say, let's go at it. And that's how World War I started. And needless to say, World War II was secondary, but it was connected to it. So that one shot in Sarajevo caused, possibly, it's hard to really pinpoint it, but I would say 100 million dead. There's no other way. It's an easy way today. You look at it, you know, and it should have been easy for them to decide not to get into a war, but they didn't have it here, you know. So, so those, you have the saying, when you ignore history, you make the same mistakes over and over again. And I can understand why President Bush, after 9/11, why he wanted to get back at the source, the countries. But he should have known that it was not an easy walk. It was not conventional warfare that was wait for us. England, around 1850, they wanted the Khyber Pass in Afghanistan. And they bribed one tribe, there were 12 tribes, and they succeeded to get that pass. Then the others, they went back to that one tribe and got them back in line with the others, and they made a surprise attack. England had 42,000 men occupying Afghanistan. And one of them, a doctor on horseback, wounded, got out. All the others, okay? That was Afghanistan. Then the Russians, of course, with our help, they were driven out. And they're not exactly mild soldiers, you know, they battle hard. So then, Iraq, they were part of the Ottoman kingdom, and at the end of World War I, they were all broken up, taken away from Turkey. They were independent. So England wanted to get their hands on the oil, and the Iraqis didn't want to give it to them. And what Winston Churchill was Secretary of Defense, and he resorted to poison gas. And they still didn't get it. So, I wonder if our president, if they knew that. You know, because you can draw conclusions. What are you going to do? You know. And was there another way not to get involved in it? You know, there was one thing in history that the Europeans were very successful against the Muslims. And I know we all years ago, they had a lot of Polish jokes. And Poland had the king to the time when the Muslims were in Vienna, Austria. They were way into Europe already. And this king was an outstanding soldier as well as a good diplomat. And he called all the others together, and they listened to him. They made an agreement, and they made him the army commander. And in 2 days of battle, he sent them packing out of Vienna. Go home. Right? So that was not the only time that Poland did something outstanding for Europe. Going back closer to our time, after World War I, the Civil War in Russia was over, and the Red Army moved in on Europe. They were all tired of fighting wars again. The Germans, the British, the French. Guess who stood up to them? Cavalry battle against the Poles. The Poles took the wind out of them, they sent them packing, they went home. The Russian cavalry. Well, that wasn't the end of it. We're going back before World War II, the Germans were working on a radio code ciphering machine. And there was a factory that was near the Polish-German border, and there was a carpenter. He was Polish, and he was very good, very smart guy. He worked at it, and he knew what it was going to be, and that it would be very useful to whoever uses it. So he goes to Warsaw and meets the British ambassador there. And he tells him what they're working on. And are you interested? Oh yes. So when he gets back to continue work, Dad found out that he was more Polish than German. So they gave him the gate. He goes to Warsaw and he builds a machine out of wood, exact duplicate of what they worked on. And then the British, it was approaching September 1939. They sent him and his machine to England to work on the deciphering. And the British, they had all kinds of brains there. They got the best available brains together. They couldn't make the deciphering. And they were getting desperate. So they were lucky. The war broke out, and there were a lot of Polish mathematicians. They escaped to England. And the British asked him, "Can you help us?" "Yes, we will try." So the Poles said, "Did you try this and this?" "Nah, that's too easy. That wouldn't work. The Germans wouldn't do that." "Well, let's try it." Guess what? The Germans was dumb enough, they did it that easy, and the Poles deciphered it. And if you listen to what Eisenhower and Patton had to say, the consequences of that deciphering was tremendous to contribute to the success of the Western powers.
I just want to say, most people, that was the Enigma machine. And
Yes.
That was a major factor in the war. Already in the North African campaign and Malta and so on, the British had that. And they had to be careful not to overuse it, so the Germans would catch on, you know, the British were onto the communications.
Right.
But that was, and it was only recently that books came out that really publicized the Polish part in this whole thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to interrupt with this.
So let's stay with the Poles. I'm not through yet.
Okay.
So what happened, there's no doubt about it. And I had one representation of the book in Jersey. I immigrated from Jersey after Germany. Well, anyway, there was a Polish-born lady there, and the lady who had invited me for the presentation, she said, "You may get some difficult time that she will be after you." I said, "Thank you for telling me." And so what happened, I didn't talk to the lady. I can take the wind out of your sail if you know about history, you know. So I told them basically the things that they did for the good of the whole world, you know. Needless to say, she became real proud. She came to me later on, she showed me her papers from Germany and all this, you know. Oh boy, did I make a friend there. So, and all the people, then they got to know more news. We were making jokes about the Poles. I know they have died down though, you know. But then they did the shipyard in Danzig or Gdansk, they started it, pushing. They were lucky they had Gorbachev as a new president of the Soviet Union. He didn't use force, he backed off. Then later on, that union leader was made the president of Poland. And then what happened with the wall, the US Reagan was after Mr. Gorbachev to take the wall down. So he had to be convinced. And guess what? Who starts marching? The Poles. And they didn't use force against them, and it spread. The Germans, at one time, 800,000 people were marching there, And the Czechs too. And the ironic part was, the German part, there was a minister, Protestant minister, led it. And his last name was Führer, leader, Hitler. So, when I read that, I told it to a friend that this guy was a little wacky. He was still with the old system. You see, he won after all, he said. But anyway, so needless to say, Poland played a major role over the last couple of centuries in the welfare of the whole world. And there's always just a few individuals, they were important enough. But anyway, let me go back to, my father, we finished the house just in time before the war started. And what happened, the house was, it's in the book, there's a picture of it. The house was on the main street, and it was nice, solid. And guess what? When the war was over, the American commander moved right in. And we lived in the basement, and I had a free hand to go through the garbage piles. Okay? So I found the primary thing was cigarette butts. I stripped them, the burnt part threw out, the rest I packed. I got about half a pound of bacon and 6 cigarettes, 4, And that was currency at the time, if you want to put it that way. At one time I found a napalm grenade in there. And I took it, I went to the GIs, and I gave it to them. Somebody else could have caused trouble with it. And they knew what it was. They were laughing, so that somebody comes and gives it to them. So, then I found a pair of combat boots in the trash. I wore them for years. That was the only pair of shoes I had. And so we had, right starting with the occupation forces there, we never had any problems with it. Whether it was the English or the Americans. The English occupied my hometown after World War I, and my mother was always speaking well of them. What happened, when war broke out, my father was drafted a couple of weeks before that already. And because the West Wall, as they call it, Siegfried Line, had to be finished. So, concrete, that was his line, and he went in. And it took a heavy toll on my mother. I had a sister, I still have her, she's still alive too. And so my mother had two things to contend with. The husband was gone, and by the teacher's account, she was very intelligent, and that is not the best position to be, because what you do is you think of the worst, what could be. And it did happen, you know, but it didn't apply to my family. We came through there in good shape, you know. Then she had a girlfriend a couple of houses down the street where she grew up with. She was Jewish, and they were tight. And she went to her and listened to her complaints. And I weighed heavy on her. What did she do? She committed suicide. You know. So, to finish that part of it, my father had to go back in the army. They had furlough, and I went to live with my uncle and aunt next door. My sister went upstairs to the people. They didn't have any children. And then what happened, the air war increased. The British bombed, the Germans bombed. And I think the British might have done that first. They sent their children to other parts of England, or even to Canada or the US. And the Germans did the same. And the girls went to private homes, my sister did, and the object was they have uninterrupted sleep. They were growing up. Instead of having the sirens go off, you know, that wouldn't make for a good growing up. And so the boys from the age of 10 years, I was just a little 10 years, yeah, 10 years. 1941, we went to camps, Hitler Youth camps. Hitler saw an opportunity to start pre-military training early. And what they did, they had 11 years old up to 14 in those camps. They had teachers from up to 8th grades. They had them run the camp as teachers. And in the afternoon, they had a teenager, maybe 16 years old, from the senior Hitler Youth. He took over with training us. Marches, running, and you name it, making slowly military training. And I was the only one who wasn't in the Hitler Youth yet, because I was too young. And if you ever see, look in the book, there is a picture in there about politically incorrect. The whole group, most of them, they all wore Hitler Youth uniforms. And I was the only one that wasn't in there yet. And I was wearing my communion suit, the Catholic Church. You know, but nobody paid much attention. The leader didn't say anything because he knew the circumstance. My father was, you know, in the army and all this. So, the worst beating I ever got was from that teacher. Let me tell you before I forget it. It still hurts. Here's what happened. The boys, they distribute the food. There was one of them, he ladled it out. So, two guys, they had gone to town in the evening, pick up the milk for the next day. And they came a little later to get the plate. So, they had not enough type of soup for one, so they had half loads from two different ones. But we didn't have a plate. So I said, put them together. So the fellow who usually deals it out, he said, "You're kidding. You wouldn't do it." He said, "You want to see it?" I took the plate, and I put half and half pudding and half pea soup in it. Okay? And the fellow gets in, and he sees this, and the others, they all laugh at him. So they said, "Ludwig did this," So he raised his hand to the camp commander, And he calls me out, and he had a furring strip there, And he beat the hell out of me. And that fellow who got the mixed soup, he told me next day, he said, I'm so sorry when I saw what he did to you. And then I was thinking, why was he so rough on me? I didn't hurt anybody, So what happened, this was at the weeks when the German army was losing the war in Russia at Stalingrad. So this was on his mind day and night. And he was all charged up with bad stuff that might happen. And he found an outlet, the furring strip in me. Well, I survived it. So making soldiers out of us, it was, well, we were too young. And then after about 27 months in the camp, we had a choice to go home. And we had no air raids in that area. My father married again. And the way they did it, they had, the woman goes to judge of peace in a city hall at a certain time, and the man goes to company commander at a certain time, and they give the oaths for marriage remote. That was it. It was legal. Very easy. They had, somebody work on it, and that was. And then the next time you can continue with the correct wedding celebration. But that way it made it legal. So we had a home again. My sister came home, and I came home. And my mother was saddled with 2 teenagers. I was easy to get along with because to me she represented authority, and that's all they had preached in that camp. My sister was more difficult. "You're not my real mother, you got nothing to say, stuff like this. And but she did her utmost, and my father made a good choice. So that was that part of it. Now, I went, in the hometown, I went to school and finished it, and I went to apply for a job at in the apprentice shop at Bayer Pharmaceutical. And we had a small plant there, about 3,000-4,000 people working there, round the clock. And they set up something that they should do here. A regular shop have for technicians for chemistry that was made out of wood, that building, because if they blow something up with concrete and bricks fly around it, it's more serious. And we had a stone building, and we learned how to file and drill holes and cut threads and all this, blacksmith. and welding, and the welding was nice. We found out things to make it exciting. Put gas into the pipe workbench, and then stick a hot rod in it, and it goes banging and flies up a couple inches. Scares the hell out of everybody. And then they made like a tripod, put a rivet in it or something, a screw, and put it in the fire in the blacksmith and cook the steam, and then had the window open and aim, and it went out in the open, you know. It was lucky nobody ever got hurt. So what happened, a couple of months, and it was all on a competitive basis. You got 30 boys there, and you had one guy there, but he was the head man. If you talk too much, 1 hour at night, back shoveling, the air raid shelter, you know. And I was there once with the whole group. I didn't like it, but some guys, they couldn't keep their mouth shut. And they were there regular every night, you know. So I found it quite interesting, and it was like a performance curve, and they had a good system, you know, competitive, and it was good. So, but then it didn't last long, and the Allies had landed, and we were sent to Holland, digging trenches for the army. And what happened, we were there for a couple of days, then they decided it's probably too dangerous, withdraw to Germany. So we went, and we got there at night, and it was air raid, complete darkness, and we slept in a barn, straw. Everybody was dead tired, you know, no problem. So somebody had to relieve himself. He didn't know where the toilet was, and he went pretty close to the living quarters of the owner. And when the lady saw that in the morning, she didn't think. And you really have to, in order to survive, you have to think at that time under Hitler. Because if you said something that didn't suit them, you were in trouble. So what does she do? She blasts out, "I'd rather have 100 Russians here than 10 Hitler Youth." In the afternoon, the Gestapo collected her. Okay? Wow. It didn't take much, believe me. And the other one was, we had a professor from Cologne, and the company hired him to teach us better communications, you know, and so he had to write reports and all this. And this guy was quite demanding, and every one of us, you know, in his eyes, we didn't know anything. And he didn't know where he was in for. So some of the guys were waiting. And what does he do? He may have had brains here, but he didn't have it fully. So he starts, in front of the Hitler Youth, he starts knocking the government, Hitler. You know, how stupid can you get? And that was the last time we had him as teacher. So what happened, one of the guys, one day he made an announcement. "Hey, I saw Professor Hoch." What's his name? What's his last name? "Where?" "In Cologne." "What was he doing?" "Oh, he was pushing a handcart with unexploded bombs." He was in a bomb removal squad. Well, I'll leave it up to you to figure out what his life expectancy was. Okay? So they didn't fool around. And, you know, if there was a holiday and you didn't hang the flag out, they visit you. And that was the last time you came back to your house. You know. They were very tough, very tough. So, and we had military training, and well, let me ask you this, I could go on and on, and I come back some other time and continue on. Now, are there any questions? Yes?
I do have one I've been thinking about. When I was growing up, I had a group of friends, and no one ever told me not to play with somebody because he was German or Italian, or was Jewish or Catholic.
Right.
And it wouldn't have mattered to me at the time because it just wasn't significant. So my question to you is, at such a young age, did you have some Jewish friends, and did you have to give them up? I mean, not to anybody else, but for yourself. I mean, could you play with them, or did someone say it's not safe to play with them? And did that change your mind set altogether about a Jewish population?
Okay. Jewish friends my age, no. They took them, dissolved the family, sent them into camps pretty early.
Even before that, though,
Yeah.
you didn't have any. Okay.
No.
Did you know what was happening at that time when they?
We had maybe 10 Jewish families in my hometown.
Okay.
They were all merchants, and they were highly respected. Why? A lot of people, too, at the end of the month, the money ran out. And if you want to use the Christian merchants, they didn't want to extend credit. The Jewish people helped, and they gave credit. So it was, the relationship was such that when they had Kristallnacht, they call it, 1938, you must have heard the name.
Yeah.
And they gave orders from the government to crack down on the Jews. And they ransacked Jewish stores, put fire to the synagogues, killed people and all this. And it was horrible what was done, My personal opinion, I have read enough books, I know history well enough. That was the biggest mistake of the German government to eliminate the Jewish population of Germany. They were a blessing to Germany. They were loyal to Germany. If you want any proof, World War I, the chemist who invented poison gas was German. The German army used it first. There was never any conflict. They considered themselves Germans first, Jewish second. In World War II, we had some outstanding Jewish officers that were recommended because of the talent they had was visible in World War I. And there were the German officers, they recommended them to Hitler. And there are a couple of them that outstanding, there are books written about them. One of them was, the Allies landing in Italy. It was not a good place because it was high, and they had, if you occupy the high points, you can really do some damage. And the one who did, if you want to use, was in charge, was General Milch. He was Jewish, and he did a good job of keeping them slow, if you want to, that was one. Then the Bismarck, the battleship, you heard of that. And the orders were to go and interrupt convoys toward Russia. And they sent it out, the captain was Jewish, and the guy supposedly over him was a political hack placed by Hitler. So he should overrule him if he did something. And he did exactly that. And the Jewish captain gave in on it. What happened, they sunk the hood all right in the first battle, but they were hit and they were trailing oil. And he wanted to go back and have it repaired. Because you trail oil, you give away the whole story, you know. And eventually they caught up with him, the British, you know. They blundered around, and it was an American plane that spotted the Bismarck, and the US wasn't even in war with Germany. And they told the British about it, and that was the end of it. You know. There were 23 ships they were chasing.
I got another question.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't mind.
Yeah.
At such a young age, how far did indoctrination go for you so that you were able to distinguish right and wrong? I don't know how. I haven't read the book, so I don't know how you excluded yourself from this.
Well, you had to roll. Well, as a kid, you know, you don't know.
Right.
There was nothing available. It was one way. Let's face it. And it was a horrible time. I was.
For you.
Yeah, but I was a kid, and they get you enthused about it. You were doing something, you know. Like in that camp, I was there over 2 years. Would you believe it? Teenagers, you see pictures in there, and you can see the ribs. Were skinny as hell. At the 2 years, nobody ever had to use a doctor. Nobody. Because they kept us busy mentally and physically. And if somebody got hurt a little bit, the camp commander, he went and he took care of him. One exception, there was one boy, he was very overweight, and his parents were divorced. He had to go to the doctor. But the rest of us, no.
How long were you there? I mean, in this situation, year-wise, month-wise?
That was in 1941 to 1943.
And you were how old?
I was 11 years, 10 years old,
In-
not 11 yet.
But you ever talk to the guy next to you and say, I hate this, or
No, we were all enthused about it.
Okay.
You know, you didn't have any brains, it's all one way.
Well, as a youngster, I would think that
Yeah,
you would be that way.
yeah.
So it was something like Boy Scouts, kind of like, you know, kept you busy and you thought you were working out and, no?
I went to school in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and there was a Canadian sergeant. So when he found out my background, you know, he wanted to talk to me. He said, I was in Normandy, and the opposing division was Hitler Youth. He said, there's no enemy like it. You know, that's what they that accomplish, the early training. And let's face it, the original Boy Scouts goes back to England. In South Africa, they had a war with the Boers, and the Boers made fools out of them. And they had to resort to something, but they couldn't do it at that time. When the war was over, the hero was a General Powell, Baden Powell, I think it was his name. and he formed the Boy Scouts, but he formed them for one reason: be prepared. Soldiers. Soldiers, you know, because he wanted to give them a better chance to survive in the war. And what happened there, they had, the Boers had commandos, like we have now, groups of 10 special forces, and they did a lot of damage, hit and run. And when they needed supports, they stopped at the nearest farms. The women and children were still there. They helped them, feed them, shelter them. And there would have been no way for the English to win. So what did they resort to? First concentration camps. They took all the mothers and the children, put them in a concentration camp. That way the support was completely gone. And eventually they won that way.
At what point did you know about the concentration camps?
It was kept in the dark, but we didn't know exactly the inside, but if you had any brains, you didn't talk about it, because you found yourself there pretty fast. Okay.
Do you think overall that the German population was unaware of what was going on like that?
They got,
Overall?
the cruel details, they didn't talk about it. And they knew, they had an idea that the people disappeared,
And that's,
but they didn't ask questions.
yeah.
Because if you ask questions, hey, you might find yourself there.
Now, when you say the Hitler Youth, is that, what age group does that encompass?
The what?
What age group does the Hitler Youth encompass? 11 years to 17 years old, or
Yes.
could you rise within that group?
Oh yeah, they had, what they did, they had the German Boy Scouts, and when Hitler took over, he absorbed them. And he didn't call them Boy Scouts anymore, he called Hitler Youth. He came right out with it, okay? So what did he do? He formed a flying Air Force training, and you ask, you know, sail planes and all this. They build them small and big, and they took pilot training. And any pilot, earlier pilots, they said anybody who flew them makes an excellent pilot. Right? They had enough time for training. The one thing was with training, the more training you had, the better your chance for survival. Take the Tuskegee Airmen, the Black Fighter Squadron. They served their time for training, let's say it was 500 flying hours, whatever it was. And nobody wanted them. Nobody wanted them. Then, what they do, they gave them another run of training, 1,000 hours. Before they saw combat, they had triple the time of the white Air Force. And when they flew escort against the Germans, they never lost an aircraft. The first German jet shot down was by a black fighter pilot. So training is a lot.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
If you weren't aware of it as it was happening, like the indoctrination, when did you start to question that all you had been learning maybe wasn't so great?
After the war,
It
Just
took that
because
long.
you saw the fallout? You never
no,
thought that?
you could, you know, for your own good, you played along, you know, and
It was just seeing what was left afterward that made you question?
of course it raised a lot of questions, but it was done. The people were deadly ashamed of it, you know. But
And how did you end up in the States?
in the States,
Yeah.
I didn't swim across the river. I had two uncles that came over in the late 20s. And one of them, Uncle Ludwig, first name, he came over in '53, visited us, and he was talking about the US and all. So he saw that I had an interest, and he told me, he said, if you want to come over, I will sponsor you. That was my way in. Now, I was in much better shape than he was coming over. I had a training, I had worked about 10 years in my trade as an electrician. And I spoke some English. I learned it from a dictionary that my father bought in 1943. It was Russian, German, and English German. And he showed it to his buddies, and he said, at the end, we're going to need one of them. You know, and he brought it home. He was, at the end of the war, he was a prisoner for about 3 weeks, and then they discharged him. You know, he left one of the first one. He was home one of the first one. So.
What would you say, you know, you mentioned that your background was Catholic. Would you say that the Catholic Church, did they play along too, or were they quiet about the whole thing? Or
They had to.
yeah, with few exceptions.
If you want to be a hero, you would be a dead hero in no time.
Yeah.
You know, that was it was horrible. Yes, sir.
After the war, my father was in the war, and he actually spent another year in Germany after the war. He was one of the few people who wanted to stay in Germany because of our relatives. And he asked that question to a lot of Germans. And a lot of Germans said, well, there was two things. That the economic situation after the war was so bad, and that Hitler and his group did help us economically. And the second thing is that everybody else was just totally scared. They had totally frightened them to the point of where everybody knew exactly what you were saying, and that is, hey, we're not going to rock the boat. And this at the time he was coming to power, this was a good thing for Germany because of the economic ramifications that happened after World War I. Yeah. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. Ludwig,
Yes, sir.
have you heard of a woman named Marge Schott from Cincinnati who owned the Cincinnati Reds?
No.
Okay, her husband had owned him and he died, so he left this baseball team to her. So she's a millionaire and she owns this baseball team. And she's from Germany. And her husband was German. Cincinnati is a big German population. And she made the remark one time, for which she paid a bad price, that if Hitler had died in 1935, he would still be considered a great hero, a great leader of Germany. And that up until 1935, the good things, like Mr. Koenig is saying there.
Yeah, I can see her point, because it didn't get nasty yet.
Yeah.
And what he did, he created jobs, and he kept the money machines running.
Right.
You know, and the Germans make the best printing press for money. They work 5 hours a day. The ones in Washington are German made. It's a joke. Yeah. The one time the Germans turned to the US when the money changed over there and they replaced it. That was in 1948. And what the Germans did, they knew there was black market time, you know, for survival. If they would have made the plates in Germany, they would have been stolen before the money would hit the street. So what did they do? They turned around and they asked the Americans. And the Americans were generous enough, they saw the point, and the first German money issued in '48, it was like a cousin to the dollar, you know. And what happened, General Clay, I think, was the commander. and he said to the Secretary of Finance in Germany, Erhard, Mr. Erhard, my advisors tell me you made a mistake, issuing the money. And the German went and he flashed it, dumped the cigar you smoke, and he said, hey, it's funny, General, my advisors tell me the same. And they
Those are two big names, by the way, they're off, Earhart and Lucius Clay.
Yeah.
Really financial heroes
Oh, yeah.
of that crucial period.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Yeah. They had excellent leadership after World War II.
well, those two in particular.
I had one presentation in Jersey. And here's what happened. I said at the end, did the Germans learn anything? I think they did, I said. And I cited, the persons and all that, what they did for the good of all of them. And what happened, I was hired by the Department of Humanity in Jersey. They paid me to go on excursions like this. And they liked it, what they heard. So I get a call, and they said, most people liked it, but there were some of them, they said, you lauded the Nazis too much. And boy, that was like a blow, And I started thinking. And then I came up with the answer. And I told her, what I thought. He said, would you mind if I send somebody over to help? By all means, do. So this guy, Dr. Winkler, he read the book and he called me up a couple of weeks later. He said, there's nothing anti-Semitic in your book. And I said, in the meantime, I figured out why a person would say that, what they said about me. And he laughed. He said, yeah, they would, I said, I have some advice for you. Don't bring that section up because they were still real tough, and any German was a Nazi, period. Whether they were good or bad. Can't wait.
I'm going to get a round of applause for you.
Yeah.
And if you will promise to stick around and talk individually to people.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I'd just like to say thank you.
Any other questions? Believe me, if I don't have the answer, I'll make it up.
I would just like to say that having read this book carefully a couple of times and talked with this man for a couple of hours, 3 hours or more, and he can range far and wide, and he knows his stuff, and some of the stuff I might disagree with. That was, as I would disagree with probably anybody in the room if you talked enough, But I have to say though, he is sort of like a skipping stone going through this book. And his early World War I background to World War II isn't so much covered in here. This book picks up when he was young and his family situation and so on. And I'm not a salesman, I'm not getting any cut on any profit or anything, but you get a more in-depth story of his personal experiences in the book. And by the way, here's a picture of when he was in the United States Army. That was about the first thing he did when he came to this country, was join the United States Army and serve there. And so I've become quite an admirer of him. And I have to say that this era, this Nazi era in World War II, was a horrible era and still a great puzzlement to many people, as Mr. Koenig referred to, of how this could have happened there in this country, this culture of the poets and musicians and scholars. How the hell did this happen? And I don't have the answer, and I don't think even Ludwig has the answer completely. It definitely was the economics and so on. But it was almost as if this gang of Nazis came in and took over the country. And once they did have control, freely elected, then you have the situation that you knew, where you kept your mouth shut. or else. It was an incident in here involving his father, where his father had just checked on, I forgot what it was there, and whoa, he had to back off. And thank you very much, Ludwig. This is a very human face on the whole situation over there, and for some people it may be still at this late stage a beginning to understand of how this could have happened and how the average family and person cope with the situation there. So he'll stick around and talk with us, and we'll have a cup of coffee or cider or whatever you like there, and thank you very much.
How much is the book?
There's a thing on this thing back there that, how to get it, and they sell it just under $18, I believe now. And so this, by the way, this is.
Do you have a
very
copy in the town library?
Oh, thank you very much. There's a copy in the Norwich Library, and there are about 3 copies in the 4-county library system. So if you go to the desk, they can have a copy for you in about 3 days here, okay? This one is a personal copy. I wouldn't sell for anything. This is an autographed copy. And
When was that written? When was it written?
When did it go press?
After 9/11, the year afterward.
Oh.
okay.
What motivated you to write that book?
Well, you know, looking back, I would do it over again, just to get it out of my mind. I went back there after the wall came down with my friend, and I went back to that camp where I spent over 2 years. And I became emotional, I was crying, you know.
Okay.
Sure.
And when I got back, up to that time, I always had nightmares about the place. That was the end of the nightmares. You read about it if you have something horrible and you want to confront it, get it out of your mind, go back to the place. And in my case, it did work. I wiped it out, you know. And the 2 things you have to do in bad times and war times, and I found out is you got to keep your religion, don't lose that, and you got to keep your sense of humor, you know, and it will make it a lot easier by that time. If you lose either one of the 2, your chances are not that good.
It certainly is interesting to see how tough Hitler was and how lenient the Germans are with all this immigration from North Africa. They're one of the few countries that have been welcoming those people from the Middle East who have been displaced. And I think that says a lot about, the German people in Germany today.
You know that.
Yeah, well, there's some of it's driven by economics, but not all of it. They need that cheap labor, there's no question about it.
Hitler was half Jewish too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was kept quiet. I found that out when I got over here.
I have another question. I'm a little foggy on how you extricated yourself from the Hitler Youth. I mean, when does one life start and the other one end? You follow my question? You were in the youth group for a certain amount of time, and then what?
Well, you get pre-military training, really, starting at 10, 11 years old.
So you're...
Up to 17, 18 when you got drafted.
And where were you?
I was trained in Moscow.
I'm just curious where you're from.
At what age? I mean, when did you leave? I don't understand.
I left at the age, Germany,
Yeah.
54.
The year 54?
Year
The
54?
war ended, I'm 85.
He was in the Hitler Youth for 27 months, he said.
Yes, but
What happened
then the war ended.
What happened?
Well,
That's why I'm
he was
wondering.
like 14 or 15 when he got out.
After you got out of the Hitler Youth, what happened?
Well, he was a teenager at home, I guess.
Well, that's what I'm trying
See
to,
things differently.
how you,
Exactly are.
all of a sudden,
At the end of the
Yeah.
war,
Yeah.
I had
My
started,
grandfather's from Germany.
and even then,
you know, I had started
That Ford,
doing
that
it.
Lee Towns.
Paperwork.
And,
They had to change it.